Cable television took off in the 1980s, and it's a tiered system where you get different tiers of service depending on what you pay for. And the way it's supposed to work is basic cable is supposed to comply with the same standards as broadcast television. So whatever restrictions broadcast television has, basic cable has the same restrictions. When you get the expanded cable is when you get into stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want your children to see. And that was because because the FCC said they must carry the broadcast channels on basic cable, and the broadcast channel said, well, if that's the case, you've got to hold them to the same standard as us. That's why you have different tiers of cable. Satellite's a little different. Satellite came in later, and satellite has a different set of rules. But the biggest one is satellite is not required to carry your local affiliates. So when you get a satellite package, you don't necessarily have to get our local standards, Como, King, Cairo. You don't get those necessarily on your satellite package. In most cases, you don't. They usually go with a nationally known affiliate like WGN or was it Chicago? Chicago's WGN, WGBH. They usually go with one of those affiliates. And that's simply because satellite is national. Satellite goes across the country, and they don't bother to piggyback in each individual state. So that's why satellite has a different option than cable. Just a quick note while I'm thinking about it. The FCC, there was a big battle that happened in the 90s about the broadcast spectrum because the television people, the National Association of Broadcasters, wanted to hold on to this whole spectrum that they had for broadcast television. Originally, they were insisting they needed the space to do HDTV because the original HDTV signal, the original concept of HDTV was that it was twice as big as television. So television standard is 525 lines of resolution. HDTV was going to be 1050. And the concept was we just double the amount of material that we're broadcasting, which consequently would have meant you needed twice as much bandwidth to broadcast the signal, twice as much bandwidth to receive the signal, and twice as much space on both sides for the clear channel. So originally they were proposing to keep all that. What happened in the 90s during this battle about the spectrum was digital television came along. Digital became a possibility. And that, interestingly enough, goes back to JPL because JPL was working on getting signals, images back from outer space, and they had come up with this digital technology that eventually the television network started to apply. The advantage of the digital signal was it used much less bandwidth than the traditional television, and consequently the broadcasters, the National Association of Broadcasters, had too much spectrum. So the FCC took that back. But the upshot of that is because they took the spectrum back, they were able to reallocate it. And this reallocation of spectrum was what made your iPhone possible, your Wi-Fi possible. It made spectrum available for emergency alert services, your firemen, your police department, et cetera. So a lot of the advances that have happened in the last 10, 15 years on technology are all because that extra piece of spectrum was given back to the general public, and that's what made the explosion of Apple's iPhone and iPads and such as that, Wi-Fi. That's what made it all possible.